What did your parents teach you as a kid that you didn't realize was actually F up until you were older? They said foster parents were all pedo who raped and pimped the kids they took in. My stepdad would tell us this whenever we got bruises from him hitting us, to discourage us from calling social services or telling a teacher. Edit. Didn't expect this to blow up. Thanks for all the love. I turned out okay. Met some people who foster in my adult years, and they're the nicest, kindest people ever. My stepdad left my mom for a Chinese mail order wife, and my mom remarried to a truck driver who is the best dad a guy could have. Anytime I felt hurt by a conflict with a friend, my parents would tell me to never talk to them again because they aren't real friends anyway. I ghosted all of my best friends thinking it was the right thing to do. Now, I know that real friends talk things out, and it makes the friendships even stronger. A very painful realization. I never even considered my parents could have been wrong. Apparently healthy conflict resolution doesn't involve complete avoidance, in the form of locking yourself in the bedroom for days on end. I got ridiculed for pouting, but I wasn't taught how to manage bad feelings or situations, so I just did what I could. Wasn't until years later I realized I was copying my parents. I was shamed for sulking. I think sulking was feeling sad or something. This. One time my parents had agreed to let me use their debit card to buy an online game in exchange for cash that I had. When the day came that they said I had to wait for an unknown reason, I understood and didn't make a scene, but was still a little disappointed. I then proceeded to get chewed out for pouting. When I said it was okay and that it wasn't a big deal, I then got yelled out for being passive aggressive. Sometimes you can't win. My dad told me he could drink beer in the car if he drank it while the car was stopped. It's only drinking and driving if the car is in motion. I was like, makes sense. I was around 4. That's actually the premise of the drinking and driving drinking game for Mario Kart. Each player needs to finish a beer by the end of the race, but you can't drink while you're driving. Pro tip: chug it all at the start of the race, and then you get the good items to make your comeback. My parents told me that I had a limited number of words, and when I got to that limit, I would die. I guess it was an easy way to make me shut up. My mom used to say that to me as well. She used to get really mad at me if she felt like I asked a dumb question, and would say that I was making her use possibly her last breath. Like she might need that breath one day, and now she's wasted it on me. My dad was teaching me about credit cards and said you can just make the minimum payment every month. It blew my mind, made it seem like free money. Thank God I didn't take that advice. I pay my credit card off every month, and he's drowning in credit card debt. What an odd take. This is pretty much the highest legal interest you're likely to be charged in your entire life. Generally speaking, unless you owe a loan shark or something, there is nothing worse to carry a balance on than a credit card debt from a financial perspective. After arguing with a girlfriend and not speaking with her for a few days, both my parents told me separately to hold on to my beef with her, like a grudge, and use it against her later. I've been married to the girlfriend now 25 years this year, never once took my parents' advice, and have no idea how my parents' marriage survived. Lol. They probably use collective resentment as a bonding experience. I have a couple in my family like that. Anytime I was at their house, without fail, they would be making passive aggressive comments, sniping at each other, bringing up all sorts of past shit, etc. As a kid, I never looked forward to going to their place, because it was always incredibly awkward. Yet, they've been married for close to 50 years. It's like bitching at each other non-stop is their love language. My mom always said she was so happy the two of them found each other, if for nothing else than that, it spared 2 other innocent people from having to put up with them. If you ignore bullies they will go away, they're just jealous of you. Yeah, I hated that. No, mom, they aren't. I'm a fat, white, poor kid with an oddly huge head, and no social skills in a neighborhood of rich Asians and Mexicans. They have nothing to be jealous of. If you're sad, that means the devil is inside you, and you need to pray for forgiveness. I was 6, and my cat had just died. Jesus Christ, what an unempathetic a-hole. During a car ride, my dad once explained to me the concept of micro-murder. It was the idea that the seconds spent in traffic behind someone driving below the speed limit, and other instances of people inconveniencing you, were seconds of your life that you couldn't get back, and should be upset about. I realize as an adult that he's got some issues, and just needed an excuse to resent random people on the street. How to lie, or avoid situations where truthful responses would get me in trouble. Anytime I spoke up about anything really, I'd be ridiculed and put down by my mother, so I stopped talking. If I told her something good happened at school, she'd ask why I was still getting such bad grades, so I just stopped talking. Wow. Same thing with smiling too much when they're in a mood or angry, or who the F knows when, because then they take out their frustrations on you for daring to not be as miserable as them. You can't look sad either though, because you don't have an excuse to be sad. There's people in much worse situations, and on and on. If someone never touches you, hit them back, and don't stop hitting until they stop moving. My dad, who is facing his third attempted murder charge. Wait, just curious, is that 3 separate attempts to murder someone and 3 failures to do so? Morbid GD curiosity. Yeah, 3 separate murder attempts on 3 different people. I'm pretty sure he just wanted to assault these people, but he has no self-control once he gets angry enough and takes things too far. That the police were going to come and take me away unless I hid. Nothing sinister. He just thought it was funny. Edit. See, this one touched a nerve. Sorry if dragged up bad memories. My dad used to tell this joke. Hey, you want a kid? Only $20. I'll give you $20 if you take him. Hahaha. He would recycle that joke a lot. It effed me up really badly. My mother would threaten to put me up for adoption semi-regularly when she was frustrated with me as a young child. Now that I am middle-aged, I really shouldn't be surprised that I always feel like a burden, constantly trying to make my footprint as small as possible. One time my dad actually made me and my brother pack our belongings into suitcases, loaded them in the car, and drove us nearly 30 minutes away while telling us he was going to leave us at the orphanage because he couldn't deal with us anymore. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old and kept crying because I couldn't remember my mom's phone number, so I thought she would just never know what happened to us. I tell it sometimes like it's a funny story, but that's capital T trauma. Upon hearing stories of my childhood, my husband had to break it to me that it was not in fact normal for moms to share their antipsychotic meds, or chill pills, as she would call them, with their young children. I can fully relate to this. Anytime my siblings or I were having a hard time growing up, my mom would have us pop one of her Xanax to put us into an agreeable daze. When I was a teenager, she got a doctor to prescribe me my own 90 tablets of Xanax, which resulted in me being hospitalized for prescription drug abuse and paranoid delusions caused by withdrawal. I had been taught to manage all discomfort with Xanax, and I was anxious and depressed 100% of the time, so I blew through those 90 tablets in a week. Do not ever be a bother to anyone. Solve all your problems by yourself. Oof, I feel this one. My parents paired it with always be accommodating to others, made it so I had very few boundaries and always tried to help others, even when I didn't want to, but could never ask or accept help when offered. Not a great mix for the abusive relationships I faced as I got older. It really hit me when we were walking on a wide sidewalk. A group approached, and my mom shoved me off onto the grass, even though the group had plenty of room. Your own kid gets body checked, so you don't even have the appearance of slightly inconveniencing strangers. Not me, but someone I know was told growing up that only sluts use condoms. Yes, their parents told them this when they were growing up. Safe sex is slutty? Odd mentality. As someone who grew up Catholic, there's probably a weird religious angle to it. My guess is it's along the lines of thinking that sex not intended for procreation is inherently slutty, and people who want to have sex without procreating use condoms, so sex with condoms equals slutty. For the super religious, safe sex for teens just means abstinence. Not F up, but when I was a kid my dad told me you couldn't get sunburned past 1 p.m. And I believed him. Until I was 23. That's a little ridiculous. Everyone knows it's 1:30 p.m. when the sun stops burning you. Situation awareness. What seems odd or out of place felt like I was being trained by Batman when I realized what he was doing. Dad's from a rough part of Mexico with a lot of narco gang wars, so he was just teaching me to read if a place or a situation was out of the ordinary. My dad's your average, run-of-the-mill engineer, but he was poor during his childhood and got into college because of scholarships. So, since he lived in a rough neighborhood, he also always insisted about being observant. Situation awareness. Pay attention to what you're doing and where you're going when out in the streets, etc. Same thing. My Russian dad taught me how to knife fight and how to use your leather belt to block it in the kitchen in his underwear while he was steaming vegetables for lunch. I was 11. I was like, Dad, I appreciate you, but we're in the suburbs. Most important takeaways. Wrap your belt around your wrist and hold the end in place with your hand. Use this to block their knife and then stab up. Thanks, Dad. Second most important thing I learned from my dad, how to do the immigrant accent to get people at the door to go away when they're handing out flyers. He speaks both Russian and English perfectly, without a trace of an accent in either. Definitely not as bad as a lot of these other ones, and I know it wasn't done on purpose to be malicious, but to eat when I was sad or upset. It's easier and faster to tell a kid to go eat something as a distraction than it is to sit down and deal with it, especially if said kid is upset a lot due to living in abusive environments, getting bullied at school, etc. It definitely really f up my relationship with food, leading to emotional eating, overweight turning into obesity, even more bullying, disordered eating, and other mental health issues. I realized probably 15 years ago that this was an issue, the cause of it, but even though I know that, it's still something I'm working on unlearning. My dad instilled crippling perfectionism in me, which I realized was insane when I got older and people told me to just do my best. When I was in grade school, I would come to my dad with A's, all super excited, but if it was anything less than a 100%, he would ask for the missing percentage. So, when I had a 98%, he'd say, well, where's the 2%? And now, if I do anything less than perfect, I beat myself up. It's like that old saying, if at first you don't succeed, give up because you're a big failure. My mom taught me that when you have bug bites, you should scratch them until they bleed and then rub salt on them to make them stop itching. It wasn't until I was 23 and passed that home remedy on to a friend and they immediately told me how masochistic it was that I realized something was weird about it. Emotional self-sufficiency. In other words, don't show your emotions. Don't feel your emotions. Don't be swayed by others' emotions. Empathy is bad and for the weak. Basically also reinforce these teachings by making me having to do bloody and demoralizing task, carrying entrails barehanded, without being allowed to use buckets or killing animals. Lots of physical punishment, verbal abuse, isolation from others. Stepmother insisted I should remain pure, so when the rapture took place, I would be a warrior saint. Yeah, when I moved out and found out people don't have to live like this, it took me a week just to decompress what I escaped from. I always had anxiety as a child, and my mother said, the only way to get over it is to deal with the situation head on. Sounds great, until I told her my fear of escalators, and she pushed me down, and I fell and almost got my hair caught. Another thing she loved to teach me is how self-defense is necessary. Great. Where do I take lessons? There were no lessons, she said. Being with my abusive ex was enough of a lesson. I should have learned then. My daughter developed a fear of escalators as a teen. We were at the airport deciding between an elevator and escalator. We stood looking and trying to gain the courage to use the escalator. A woman with 2 suitcases goes up. One suitcase must have been heavy, and it pulled her backward down the stairs. She got caught somehow and couldn't get up. She rode up backward on her butt, being pulled by suitcases. No words were spoken as we turned and took the elevator. That parents are completely infallible, know exactly what's best for you, should never be questioned and you should do everything they ask you to do, including being effectively a slave. This 100%. As a newish parent, 5 and 2-year-old, I always try to treat my kids as human beings by giving them, mainly the 5-year-old at this point, choices, and actually listening to them, unless you know, they want to put their hand in boiling water, or something. My dad always told me, work will set you free. Do your chores. Work will set you free. Do your homework, because work will set you free. This went on for about a decade, until I came back from history at school, and asked him why it was on the entrance to Auschwitz. No kid should be on drugs. I was 11, diagnosed with ADHD by a psychologist. Back when that was pretty new. Yeah. Every teacher stated some version of, if you weren't so smart, I'd hold you back, and I barely graduated high school. Seriously thought I couldn't do math. Flash forward to 28. Get over the stigma. Take good meds. Graduate cum laude with degree in finance. At 32. Turns out I can do pretty heavy equations in my head when the hurricane isn't spinning. No kid should be on drugs. I started on Ritalin age 47. If I had access to this as a child, my life would have been very effing different. They made me distrust my own intelligence. They talked down to me and treated me like an airhead, giving me a smirk every time I tried to be serious about anything. It wasn't until I was an adult that I learned that I am intelligent and gained self-confidence, despite the negative self-esteem they had instilled in me. To be in constant survival mode, like as in always worrying about the end of the world. Why? Why am I constantly, as a child, looking over my back in fear of what I will offer to a group if the apocalypse happens? Weird stuff. I thought I was savvy in bunker mode, but really it's trauma inducing. You have better balance, so you, the 10-year-old, should climb up on the roof and clean the gutters and sweep the chimney. Also climb up to the top of the flagpole at the wreck and fix the rope stuck in the pulley and install new gutters. But I was 13 by then. If someone gets in a fight with one of your older brothers, find a brick and hit them in the back of the head. Actually, I knew that was a bit F up back then. That you are at least partially to blame for anything bad that happens to you. Get beat up by a bully, it's at last partly your fault, and you're to be blamed and punished for it. Get bit by a dog, it's at last partly your fault, and you're to be blamed and punished for it. Accidentally step on a nail, cut yourself, fall, have an asthma attack, it's at last partly your fault, and you're to be blamed and punished for it. A few years ago my younger brother, we are in our 30s now, was out on the town at night and got mugged. I had to drive him to the hospital. I started blaming him for it, and had to pause and ask myself WTF was I thinking? And right then and there, had an epiphany that the way we were raised was totally screwed up. My grandparents were morticians. I remember sitting on an embalming table, swinging my legs back and forth off the table, while watching my grandfather embalm someone, and talk to me about what he was doing. I was 7. It's honestly a great memory, and the many times I had with him like that taught me a lot about how to deal with death, how life is cherished, how different grief can be from person to person, and how to be emotionally strong for others. Good guy, just was very desensitized to his work's more macabre parts. Edit. To add to this story, my grandparents were morticians for work, owning their own funeral home, built magicians as a hobby, frequently traveling with, and training other magicians. When my grandfather passed away we had a special service just for his magician friends. Some of the most famous magicians in the world showed up for the wand breaking, where my grandfather's wand was broken in two. My father told me that crying and expressing sorrow was a trait of bitches and underlings. I've spent the majority of my life soaking in and bottling up emotions, and would have random outbursts in the form of fights and smashing shit. It wouldn't take till about 2 years ago, I was in a bromance with somebody, when I found out the hard way my dog passed. I buried her myself and acted like it was nothing in front of him. He saw right through me. I was a ticking bomb ready to explode. I remember we both sat in the tall grass, and he told me that the ball of stress in my chest and the tension in my face didn't make me less of a man. He told me, crying makes you human, I remember after he said that, I damn well melted into the grass. Thank you, Ryan. You are the most beautiful bastard I ever met. That it's okay if my stuff goes missing, because dad probably took it because you shouldn't leave stuff out, and his medication makes him forget where he left the stuff he took. Having stuff left out meant visible in any way, even in my own room. Growing up, my shit would always disappear, and I'd always eventually find it among his shit. Sometimes years later, I'm sure my older brother was the culprit sometimes, as he was known to be a klepto, but never got past my dad doing it. I turned 16, and the day of my birthday my wallet, full of birthday money including a check from my grandma, and my expensive pocket knife went missing out of my car. They were in my work clothes I had just changed out of. Found my wallet empty and my knife in his office in a desk drawer. I moved out that day against his wishes, but my mom helped me. How F is that? And I got even worse stories than that. The only reason people are nice is to get something from you. I'm 21 now and never had a close friend. Every relationship I've ever had has been superficial. My parents hated having other kids over because then someone was getting free childcare out of them. We weren't allowed to hang out with other kids outside of school because surely those kids were trying to lure us in to be molested by their family members. I'm so lonely, but I've missed out on those important years. I feel like that ship has sailed. My parents are paranoid loons, and I've been getting better since I realized that. But man, am I F up. They still remind me that someone is waiting behind every tree. I didn't realize how bad it was until my boyfriend was at my parents' house one day and pointed out to me how bizarre it was that they full on panic when someone rang the doorbell. Okay, here goes. My dad and his dad before him were serial womanizers. I mean, they'd try to screw everything that moved. Right now, my dad didn't like his dad. Dude was an abusive piece of shit who disowned him just to be an a-hole. My dad did his best to be a better father, but I'll be damned if he didn't pick up one of his dad's worst traits. So from a young age, I was essentially taught to objectify women. I was taught to try to screw anyone who offered. I mean, literally, my dad was trying to get me laid at 12, and he succeeded with my best friend's 18-year-old sister. He affectionately referred to it as start a fussy, so you can learn a thing or two. It didn't feel right before or after. I wanted to be friends and respectful, but I didn't know how. Mom and dad divorced when I was 8, and although my mother and I still talked and I'd go to visit her, she had her own demons to address as well. It's like there was a gremlin in my head trying to pull all the effing wires. I just wanted to try to start up a normal relationship with a girl, do the normal basics, and move at a slow pace, but I didn't know how. I mean, I ended up coming across as creepy and stalkery and all that. In retrospect, I can't say I blame their reactions. My wife tells me I have resting psycho face. She even says in the beginning I was kind of creepy. What hurts the most these days? I want to be an ally, right? An ally to POC, an ally to the LGBTQ+ community, and an ally to women. But I know that last would make me a hypocrite. See, again, I have been a creep. Not just creepy, but an all-out creep. I know I've been a pest and pressured women into doing things they weren't comfortable doing. Nothing like rape or abuse or random D-pics or anything, but regardless, I've pressured women. I've made them uncomfortable. I've mistreated them and used them. I've had some who were great friends leave me and end our friendship because I made them uncomfortable and was inappropriate, and goddammit they were right to do so. Some things happened in 2020 that essentially were come to Jesus moments, and all that bullshit from before stopped. But regardless, I am so effing sorry for what I've done. I regret all that I did. I wish I could reach out and apologize to every single one of those women for what I did, and I have apologized to some so far, but I know there are others who are probably happier not hearing from me. All this I credit to my dad essentially teaching me that women are objects instead of equals who deserve to be respected and treated right. I have 2 daughters and a son now. I have to say it wouldn't sit right with me if someone acted to my daughters the way I've acted to women before. One little bastard actually sent my oldest a D-pic over Snapchat that didn't go over well, and my son, everything my father taught He dies with me. He will be a better man than I ever was. I am sorry not only to all of those women who I hurt, and I'm sorry to all of the women reading this who've been hurt by the creeps out there. You didn't deserve it then. You don't deserve it now.